Welcome, students. So today we are going to talk about Gurudutt Padukone, one of the exceptional filmmakers of Indian cinema. Born in 1925, he in fact spent a lot of time in Calcutta. But what became particularly significant is his early exposure to first Uday Shankar's dance troupe. He was part of that group in Almora. He learned dancing, and when we look back into his films, exceptional films like particularly Pyasa or Sahib Bibi Ghulam, we see that dance and songs play a significant role in his narration, in his style of storytelling. The other crucial and the second one, that is, the other crucial and significant influence in his style of filmmaking was probably, this is how I would like to read, is his association with Prabhat Film Company, Pune. In Pune, something else also very significant happened, something very important happened. That was his association with Devanand, the actor. Because together, we will see that together Devanand and Gurudutt, they will be making in the early 50s, in 51 in particular, really outstanding films like Baazi. Baazi is important and became extremely popular because of the ways what became kind of, popularly known as Gurudutt close-up. So what was important about Baazi is the uses of close-up. In fact, when we look back into the history, especially history of Bombay and the cultural scene of Bombay, what we see by the 40s, a number of people, especially the left thinkers and the left cultural activists, had already arrived in Bombay. Bombay became, there was Sadat Hasan Manto, there were very important writers like Sahil Ludhianvi and Shailendra, and also actors like Balraj Sahani and Zohra Sehgal. Gurudutt knew Zohra Sehgal from before because they were together in Almora at Uday Shankar's dance school. So what I'm trying to draw your attention to is, this coming together of a number of very, very important people who produce a particular kind of filmmaking or who introduce a kind of filmmaking in the early 50s. So let me talk about what really was this style of filmmaking. One could suggest or, argue maybe also that this was drawn from his Gurudutt's association with Prabhat, because what was known as the Prabhat touch, the uses of the track shot, the uses of the strong light, shadow on the faces of the character. If you think of V. Shantaram's, Manus, a film like that in the 30s, we can see that Gurudutt was exposed to, or many of these filmmakers were exposed to European and American films, especially the one that I want to underline or highlight is the influences of film noir. So when we say noir or film noir, we do not necessarily, in the Indian context that is, we do not necessarily mean that it is drawing from classical noir. But when we look at these films of the early 50s, we see that there's a particular way in which they are shooting, taking shots or using lights, let's say low-key lights. There are extensive sequences where you will find the silhouetted face, in the dark. You do not know who this character is. Suddenly you find them picking up the phone. That's how CID opens. That's how many of these films open. CID was produced by Guru Dutt and shot, directed by his assistant, who later became a very important director, Raj Khosla. So, and there would be these, night shots, which were unusual at that time. And you would have these extreme long shots of the street, which are dark, uses of the rain, uses of various shady characters, what is known as the quote-unquote femme fatale. And there is a lot of, dancing, there are the bar sequences, there's gunfight, there is thrills, and so on. So when we see Bazi, 1951, which was also one of the early hits of Devanand, it is really, it sort of inaugurates this moment, It inaugurates it introduces a particular kind of a film experience to the Indian audiences. But what is important, what is really one should make a note of, is that this kind of style was possible because Guru Dutt was associated with a number of people. And if we look at his films like Pyasa, 1957, or later films, Kagaz Ke Phool, 1959, or Kagaz Ke Phool was actually the last film that he directed, and as a director-producer, his number of films are not too long. But then the question that we need to ask is, why, if his list is not too long, why are we studying him? Why are we going back to his films? Because of the ways, kind of legacy his films leave, or the kind of, neo-cinematic language a film like Pyasa inaugurates. But before we go into Pyasa, what I would like to discuss actually is a kind of a triad, association of three people: Sahil Ludhianvi, V.K. Murthy, and Guru Dutt. Sahil Ludhianvi, he was thrown out of the college, then he shifted to Pakistan, then finally, after the publication of his rather controversial book Savera, he came to India in 1949. The other figure is V.K. Murthy, who was associated with another camera person of Guru Dutt, that is Ratra. So you will see actually there is a sequence in Kagaz Ke Phool where both these camera people, Ratra and V.K. Murthy, are there in Kagaz Ke Phool at the moment when you have, Wahida Rahman's character entering the studio and Guru Dutt is sitting on the director's chair and they're trying to shoot Devdas.
जी ये कोट है इसमें। कोट? जी हाँ, बरसात में, मेरा मतलब दिल्ली में आपने दिया था ना मुझे, वो बरगद के पेड़ के नीचे।
जी आप यहाँ कोट वापस देने आई हैं?
जी हाँ, जी नहीं, मैं काम की तलाश में बम्बई आई थी। कोर्ट में आपका कार्ड और पता मिल गया, तो यहाँ मैं।
अच्छा, मैं शॉट ले लूँ, फिर आपसे बात करूँ। गुप्ता, इन्हें कुर्सी दो।
So going back to Sahil Ludhianvi, if you study Pyasa, one of the crucial things is his critical writing. If you think of particularly two songs, one is Jinhe Naaz hai Hind pe kahan hai, and the other is Ye Duniya Agar Mil Bhi Jaye To Kya Hai. If you carefully read the lyrics, they are kind of scathing criticism of the new nation, and they come to represent a lot of disappointment that was brewing. 1957 is an important year in that sense, a threshold year, 10 years after the independence, and Pyasa is able to represent that. Pyasa, in fact, you will see that this work of the three people, V.K. Murthy, Sahil Ludhianvi's writing, and Guru Dutt's own perception of the social reality, which is presented in a melodramatic way, produce a very, very intense narrative of the times. And I would really like to draw your attention to these exceptional, films and the style that they were producing, a particular kind of a black and white photography, specific lensing, and use of light and shadows that was really uncommon and remains uncommon in history of Indian cinema. Let me just talk about the kind of lenses that V.K. Murthy said he used. Murthy narrates that he used 75mm lens for the magnificent close-ups. Guru Dutt, as I said, was famous for the close-ups. And 250 ASA film stock for the night shots. You have to understand, shooting in the night, in real night, was unusual because we are talking about stock, we are talking about uses of light, we are talking about location. And here you have Murthy and Guru Dutt trying to experiment with rain, with fog, and so on and so forth. So this is very, very important. Also, in the case of many other films, he talks as to how he has shot, the ways in which he has shot Waheeda Rehman. And we know that Waheeda Rehman looks amazing in most of Guru Dutt's films. So you have V.K. Murthy actually talking about the ways in which the lenses he used, the diffusers he used, the lights he used, and then how it was connected with the larger concern of Guru Dutt. So when you go back to Kagaz Ki Phool, you can see what kind of really pioneering work Murthy, Guru Dutt together were doing. And if you read Murthy's interview, he repeatedly says that he tried many things. He was influenced by European cinema. But it was only Guru Dutt that, who could use, who understood. And there was, of course, a camaraderie. But more important than that, it was Guru Dutt who could actually use these kind of, style effectively. So, finally, what were these films about? Pyasa, 1957. Pyasa is this film about the failed poet who is like a, European Flaunier. Flaunier is this intellectual who looks back into the world. He is part of this group, but he still maintains a distance. So he is a failed poet and he tries to publish his poems. His poems are never published, and then he meets a sex worker, and eventually people, there are two episodes. There are a few episodes in the film. One of the important one being that they think that Vijay, the poet, played by Guru Dutt himself, is dead, and the other is that when sex worker Gulabo, played by Waheeda Rehman, publishes, she spends all her belongings and she sells them and she publishes his book, which is called Parchaiya. And, what is interesting, that Sahil Ludhianvi, whom I mentioned earlier, his biography is also known actually is Parchaiya. So there are these interconnections, very interesting interconnection of the times, of the people who were associated with the film and the story. So going back to Pyasa, when finally his book of poems is published, Vijay comes back from rehab and he says that initially he says he is puzzled, he is perhaps happy also that his book of poems have been published, but later in the last sequence he rejects everything and leaves. What is interesting about Pyasa is the kind of critique it produces through, as I said, Sahil's writing and through V.K. Murthy's camera work, a critique of the social reality of the times. And that is very important, Shot in Calcutta and shot on the streets, involving people, faces, and if you have seen the song, Jine Naaz hai Hind pe kahan hai, it's actually a very interesting sequence. This is set in the red light area in Calcutta. So you have the figure sitting there with his friends, and he's always, detached from his immediate reality. He remembers the death of his mother, in which we have witnessed in the previous scene. So death of the mother is kind of a metaphor of, representing the mother nation, and you find therefore when in this red light area, there is also a dancer whose little child is crying in the background. So there is this doubling of the mother nation, Vijay's own mother's death, and this sex worker who is also the mother. And then he cannot stand it anymore. He leaves, and then you have this song which is sung by Rafi, and this kind of this really heart-wrenching kind of a lament, Jinhe naaz hai Hind pe kahan hai. And the use of the music in particular is important, the stringent strings, and it hits you, it really hits you. And if you are carefully reading into the lines, you will see that it is describing the nation, which is actually a very young nation in 57, that it is already, there are many shattered dreams. Also, what is important about Pyasa, that it has been read as a kind of a retelling of this famous plot of Devdas, especially if we think of 1935 Pramotesh Barua's Devdas. Pyasa is actually, you can see, if you look at particularly the ways in which the last sequence is shot when Vijay comes back to Gulabo, and they decide to leave this world, this everyday mundane world, you will find that there is the ways in which the framing is done, the ways in which the shot taking is executed. There is reference to this 1935 Pramotesh Barua film Devdas. But what is interesting is that there is a twist in the tale. The twist is that, we all know the Devdas story, Paro, Devdas, and Devdas goes back to Paro to die at her doorstep. But here, he kind of abandons the figure that represents Paro, and in reality, he goes away. He abandons the world, the everyday world, and goes away actually with Gulabo, who's a sex worker, or who is maybe a reworking of the character of Chandramukhi. But what I would like to believe is that, or I would like to actually argue, is that it is Kagaz Ke Phool in which Gurudutt makes this point in a far more pertinent way, which is that in this film, the filmmaker, also again played by Gurudutt, is actually, he's shooting a film which is Devdas. So there are this, it is very important for us to understand, for all, more or less all, exceptional filmmakers, authors, or auteurs, there are these interconnections between many films, So there you cannot really read one film in isolation. You have to really see the connections between the number of films that they are making, and there are many sort of intertwined stories that are brought together. So in Kagaz Ke Phool, again he goes back to the main plot of the Devdas, but with variations. And one of the significant variation being that it is not simply working, retelling the plot of Devdas, but it is about maybe a kind of a making of Devdas. I particularly want to draw your attention also to the ending, and the beginning, which is like, this director who is a failed director sitting on the chair, sitting on the catwalk up there, and then this man dies, and it's like a person, the dead man's story, as it were. And then he talks about his rise, and then his failures, his disinterest in filmmaking. Finally, this extraordinary director who was extremely popular works as a kind of a junior artist in the industry. So there are something more, also equally important, I would say, if not more important, is his reference to new theatres, the studios. So there are references to new theatres, other films like Nartaki, like Street Singer, and also Vidyapati, actually. And also you will find that if you watch the film, there are these posters that are brought back from new theatres and so on. Also a particular production manager, a character in the film, is going back to the new theatre's production manager. So in a way, Kagaz Ke Phool is the film didn't work. After Kagaz Ke Phool, Gurudutt did not direct any film, though he did produce other films. In Kagaz Ke Phool, it is almost like this man's vision, or this man's sort of understanding of the artistic quest, of the film industry, of style, the filmmaking style, and so on and so forth. One point that should be sort of made, that many people confuse and consider Saheb Bibi Ghulam to have been made by Gurudutt. The film has been produced by Gurudutt, but the film has not been directed by Gurudutt. But how was this myth produced? If you watch Saheb Bibi Ghulam, you will see that Gurudutt's style of filmmaking, which was produced, as I said, in association with V.K. Murthy, his writers, his script writers, his lyricist, his script writer, and so on, they come together. They seem to fall into place like a jigsaw puzzle. It is like everything comes together. So even when Gurudutt is absent or not present as the director, the film bears many of the stylistic elements that have been produced through a number of films. The early Noah films, the early light-hearted films, which still had this kind of a use of shadows on the faces of the character. Pyasa in particular, which is so important, which is such an important sort of a story about the times, and Kagaz Ke Phool, which is like as I said, an epic narration of a larger history. But that style of storytelling is evident in Saheb Bibi Ghulam, and you will see that the figures, number of figures dancing in the dark, or the way Wahidah Rehman has been shot, particularly Meena Kumari's face, her demeanor, the framing, the writing, everything. So that is what I was trying to say in the beginning. Gurudutt is, important, or we should go back to his films, or his films are watchable so many times, is because the kind of style that he produces and the legacy that he has been able to produce, and kind of timelessness, that you can actually find that kind of a storytelling in probably in a range of other films.